of the development frame and the gaze, and above all, the resourcing capabilities of higher education research institutions. And you've heard throughout this morning about the extraordinary imbalance in terms of research production as measured by publication output and by citations. So if collaborations are configured differently, that is, if they're configured not just to ensure fairness or equity in concrete collaboration arrangements, such as the division of labor, decision-making, access to resources and rewards, such as authorship of publications, but go beyond that to redress the multiple, much more fundamental layers of power imbalance in the production of scientific knowledge, then these collaborations have the potential, we would argue, to be transformative in the true sense of the word. To match the many transactional arrangements that we have at the moment with a chance to change, genuinely change the world, so that our institutions are not just world-leading, but also world-changing. This is not an altruistic or a product of guilt for historic injustices. Transformational partnerships, I argue, and my colleagues argue, will make global scholarship not only more just, but also richer, opening up new challenges, new opportunities that come from this wider range of approaches and new ways of thinking. So this is what the Charter envisaged. It asks for purposeful change in the policy and regulatory frames of higher education institutions, funders, publishers, research assessment and science government bodies, making sure that the rules of the game are set collaboratively, not just in the global north. So, these are the kinds of transformative collaboration models that we're suggesting in the Charter as not just best, but actually standard practices. Shared norms, international and local, resource streams, who gets what. But above all, these policy and regulatory frameworks. So many of our joint projects, whether they're at Bristol or beyond, fonder over who's responsible for fluctuations in exchange rates. They fonder over different employment practices. They fonder over who's going to be responsible for visas or the cost of surcharges. And it's getting down at this level of detail, but also hanging on to the very high level sense of what could be achieved where we need to work together. So from the perspective of universities, such as the one that I lead in the global north, why do we do this? We do this because we genuinely believe that fostering African-centered partnerships will make our own research and education better. By empowering African researchers and institutions, we will make the research results outstanding. Promoting knowledge exchange, co-creation, redressing those power imbalances in decision-making, rethinking authorship practices, and promoting, above all, not short-term project-by-project collaboration, but long-term trust, and advocating together for policy changes both at a national, local, and above all at international level. And it was extremely exciting in July, and I met many of you there, to support and partake in the launch of the Charter in Windhoek during the Biennial AAU Conference of Vice-Chancellors, Rectors and Presidents of African Universities, where we had almost 70 institutions, including funders, sign up. The resonance that the Charter received then and the spirit that it created were tangible, and the active endorsement it garnered in Windhoek and since then has been extraordinary, which leads me to the absolute determination to make sure that this isn't just something that people sign, but something that we live collaboratively. So now almost 100 different institutions have signed the Charter, explicitly endorsing its principles and aspirations and undertaking to support and engage in the wider initiative to realise them. Besides the African bodies who co-created the Charter, signatories include major African and global university networks, such as the Coimbra Network, the Australia-Africa University Network, and the Association of Commonwealth Universities, and the Guild. It includes academic associations and organisations, such as AISA, the ASA UK, and ARUA. Individual higher education signatories range from the foremost public and private universities within the continent to key higher education institutions from North and Latin America. In the UK, to name only a few, besides the University of Bristol, signatories include Leeds, King's College London, and the University of Exeter. So not only institutions who will benefit from this, but those who create the policy around it have also signed up. The International Science Council and the Guild, as I've said. UKRI, the British Academy, and the Wellcome Trust in the UK have signalled not just their readiness, but their keenness to engage seriously with the Charter. So, why do we do this? And to be blunt, for the University of Bristol, the Charter is a very local as well as global way of working with the world. If Bristol is known for anything internationally, it is for the toppling of the statue of Edward Colston, a 17th century slave trader, although this is a 19th century statue. I don't have time to go into the history, but that's a whole other story about why we have a 19th century statue of him, which was pulled into the harbour of Bristol on the 7th of July 2020 during Black Lives Matter's protests. And it forced the city to really engage with its, to be blunt, past based on the transatlantic slave trade and some epistemic issues around racism and racist behaviour. Although the University of Bristol is founded in 1909, long after this, we have deep roots within the city which we also need to acknowledge. And we have local communities who do not believe that we are working on their behalf. So it's not just a new spirit of co-creation, collaboration, working together and redressing power imbalances that needs to be done at a global level. It also needs to be done at a local level. And actually, much of what the Charter principles have shown us are those that we are now bringing into our community relationships. And we have made many really clear commitments as we put together a program that we're calling Reparative Futures. We are committing to the causes of social justice, both local and international, to pursue restorative futures through engagement with and in the city of Bristol and revising relations with Africa. And it's no coincidence that our Pro-Vice Chancellor International, her title is actually Pro-Vice Chancellor Global Civic Engagement, seeing the local and the global as being two sides of the same coin. PARC, the Perivoli Africa Research Centre, which really kick-started the Charter, is an embracing of Pan-African ideals, goals, and identification with an intellectual diaspora. And we have found numerous existing and developing research partnerships across the continent, with particularly strong relationships with the University of Cape Town, where we've had recently completed 8 PhD collaborative studentships, and are starting a program of new early career and professorial exchange fellowships. And I'm just going to pause briefly, and with Professor Reddy's permission, to say what we actually learned from those collaborative studentships, which of course did take place during COVID. So they're not exactly the perfect example. But we invested in them with UCT because we wanted to invest in growing talent, capability that would stay in the continent. We've heard about brain drain or brain circulation. That was the plan. But like all good plans, it founded on a policy. a policy that is now changing, but that policy was that there were different forms of PhD examination, and you had to have an in-person viva for the University of Bristol. And without really thinking about it, that final year of writing up tended to happen in the UK rather than in Cape Town. And then the viva took place. They're not all completed at the moment, but the majority have now got jobs, or many of them have now got jobs in the UK because, of course, the skills they have developed, particularly in health economics, for example, are extraordinarily in demand globally. And we are now rethinking and have had to put in a very different kind of structure, which is going to make sure that the final part of those PhDs, those new PhD programs, take place in Cape Town. We don't want to put restrictions on people's lives. As you heard from Adam Habib earlier on, people meet their partners, they start families, they get jobs. You don't want to stifle individual career pathways, but when you're trying to put structures in place, we could be more thoughtful about how you actually quietly embed the expectation that you will grow your career on the continent. Now, I'm going to finish with a new conundrum. We've been talking again about artificial intelligence for most of the morning. Artificial intelligence that will transform our educational provision, artificial intelligence that will inform the ads that we get on our mobile phone, artificial intelligence that will transform how we're recognized at passport control. And the University of Bristol, 3 months ago, was awarded the contract to be the host for and to own and manage the new supercomputer for artificial intelligence for the United Kingdom. I've never signed a contract as big as this. And your pen sort of, well, you don't really sign it, but it was £224 million for something that will actually fit into a container. This is the National Composite Centre, which is already built on the outskirts of our campus. So £224 million later, and contract sign, it's due to open in July. Incredibly fast between contracting and delivery. But it had to be done by the 2nd of November, so it could be announced at Rishi Sunak's AI Summit. I'm not saying politics comes into any of this. But this is a really interesting situation for us and for our commitment to Africa-centered partnerships. You will see there was a member from Nigeria there at the summit, but this was done so that the UK and the US could be globally leading in defining what safe artificial intelligence means for the world. The highlight, of course, was the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom in conversation, buddy to buddy, with Elon Musk, and the majority of attendees were San Francisco's, we call them tech bros, in the UK. So you have, if we're not careful, a situation in which the global rules for artificial intelligence are being defined by a relatively small number of private players, primarily West Coast, US-based, some European, some UK, and that the governance of it is, the tussle at the moment is between China, the UK, the US, and the EU. And the voice of the African continent is nowhere to be heard in this absolutely essential future-facing conversation that will have such implications for what we teach, how we teach, the future jobs that our graduates go for, and the tools and techniques that we have available to us. And so Bristol is the host. We don't own this, we are hosting this on behalf of the United Kingdom. We've been told that we need to prioritise UK interests, that this is part of our competitive advantage. It should also be said that the national grid, which supplies electricity, has had to create an entire new substation next to it to supply sufficient electricity to this. Now, having spent time in African universities, the electricity alone, the consistent, absolutely 100% guaranteed electricity alone would be a stretch. And yet the capabilities of this extraordinary facility, which can tear through at lightning speed beyond gigabytes of data, whether they are cancer scans, whether they are genetic material, whether they are the faces of people whose passports have been... this will be transformative. We heard this morning about perhaps Africa needs to run because it can't afford just to walk. This is an absolutely classic case. So what I'm committing to is to making sure that as the hosts of this extraordinary facility, we commit to not just making it a national facility, but an international facility. That won't be straightforward with a government who is not renowned for its favouring of granting visas to people who aren't from the UK, but it absolutely has to lie at the heart of our Charter on transformative research collaborations. Because if we don't do it, who will? So with that, please, to find out more about the Charter, and you can sign online, please visit park.bristol.ac.uk. Thank you all very, very much.
You left too quickly. Please stay with us. Yeah. Thank you so much, Professor Welch, for a very stimulating presentation. I didn't realize that you could start a talk with human hair and wigs and end up on artificial intelligence. And within that space, make the case for truly equitable partnerships. Partnerships that really address every layer of the research and training enterprise. And that's what I like about the African Charter for Transformative Research. And I think that ARUA, is already doing this when we consider what we are doing with our clusters of excellence, where we, together with the Guild, we are co-creating the research agenda. And so it's not some people somewhere defining what we should do, already preparing it, and then calling us to the table. I really will encourage every African university leader present here to go online, look for the charter, and sign up to it so that together we can work to really make this beneficial for us and have long-standing equitable partnership. It is when this happens that we can truly also influence policy and the things which really embroil us as university leaders and practitioners and researchers. Thank you very much once again. So you have you will stay with us and then join the discussion at the end of the plenary session. So Professor Walsh sets the tone for the plenary sessions, which we're going to go into right now. We have two presenters. So we will have the two presentations, and then we will open up for a discussion after that. And the plenary sessions this afternoon is focusing on governments at the universities of the future. And so for a moment, we're going to project into the future. Of course, we will look at what is pertaining at the moment as far as governance of universities are concerned, and then we will project into the future and see what happens. So we have two presenters. I'd like to invite them to join us upstage. Professor Liz Liange, please join us, and then Professor Lanre Fagbohon. Yes. Thank you. I will introduce both speakers now, and then we will have the plenary speeches back to back, and then I would come back to direct the discussion thereafter. So I will start with Professor Olarangwajo Adigun Fagbongun, and he is, did I do a bad job at that? You will tell me when you come here. And he's a scholar and practitioner specializing in environmental law, climate change, and sustainable development. He has a rich background in working with various governmental and non-governmental organizations, contributing significantly to environmental policy and law. Most recently, he led the review of Nigeria's Water Resources Bill 2020 and the Climate Change Act 2021. He has collaborated with global partners on regional projects and served on the Special Task Force of the International Bar Association on Climate Change. He served as Vice Chancellor of Lagos State University between 2016 and 2021. He is currently a member of the Board of Trustees, Nigerian Law Academy, member JAMB Equal Opportunity Group, and member National University Ranking Advisory Committee. He is a recipient of the National Productivity Order of Merit Award. And he will be speaking to us on mapping governance risk, the future of universities. Our second speaker, plenary speaker this afternoon, is Professor Liz Lange. She is the special advisor to the Deputy Vice Chancellor Learning and Teaching at Stellenbosch University. Until April 2022, she was UCT's Deputy Vice Chancellor, Teaching and Learning. Between 2014 and 2018, she held a similar portfolio at the University of the Free State. She's the executive director of the Higher Education, she was the executive director of the Higher Education Quality Committee of the Council of Higher Education and acting CEO of the same organization between August 2007 and 2008. She has been involved in the development and implementation of science and technology and higher education policy in South Africa for a decade and a half. And she will speak to us on re-engaging governance praxis at African universities, a reflection from the trenches. I don't know which trenches those are. And so it is now my pleasure to invite Professor Fagbohon to speak to us.
Thank you very much. Sorry. The chair of session, thank you very much. And let me support you against the audience that you actually got it right when you said Professor Fagbo. You're actually on the right path. Yes. It's the first one you did not get, but that is permissible, Larry Fagbo. The speakers and other participants, good afternoon. One of the toughest things to do, and I think Evelyn has broken the challenge in keeping everybody awake after the lunch. Permit me to specially thank the Vice Chancellor of the University of Lagos, because during my time as the Vice Chancellor of Lagos State University, I had so much support from the University of Lagos in the way the Vice Chancellor, other members of the university supported to quality assure all the processes that we did. So I use this opportunity to thank you. Let me also thank the leadership of ARUA for giving me the platform to come in today and speak to this very distinguished audience. What qualified me to come in and speak this afternoon? I don't think it is simply because I'm also a lecturer and a researcher. I think it goes beyond that. I think it goes back to the fact that I was privileged to lead a university at a time. That university that I led, a public university with some close to 30,000 students, 3,000 workforce. The university was challenged, so much so that 7 months to my assuming office, my predecessor was not able to access his office. And there was so much of crisis. Fast forward 2016 to 2021, the period of the 5 years when the university worked together. What happened? For the 5 years, the students who used to go on the streets did not for one day go out of the campus to create any problem. There was no challenge between the university and government, the university management and students for the 5 years. The university became a World Bank Center of Excellence, classified as capable of creating knowledge. Not only that, the university was ranked by Times Higher Education as number 2 after the University of Ibadan. Professor Bamiro, thank you so much, sir, for the kind of mentorship that you have always given. Why am I relating this? It speaks to something. It speaks to the fact that universities in Africa, the modest achievement that we were able to do then, if we consolidate on it, universities in Africa can actually do so much. If you look at the background to this conference, you will see that so much was stated in terms of the challenge that African universities are having, struggling to achieve a lot. When I was listening to Evelyn, 2 things were clear that Evelyn made poignant issues of. 1, collaboration. If we have that kind of collaboration that we're looking at, we can achieve a lot. 2, maximizing the opportunities of collaboration and then looking at how to deal with the issue of power imbalances. I want to say this. The major problem that Africa has are deep-seated governance issues, which, if we do not surmount them, all of the things that Evelyn is looking at, the various things that we have spoken about in the morning, will remain lofty aspirations, and we will not be able to get there. And what you will have in our hand is, yes, we know what to do. Yes, we want to do what is appropriate, but how do we get there? I'll confess, it is not as if I have the answers as I'm standing in front of you. I am just going to throw up the issues in terms of talking from the experience of what I had when I was opportune to sit there, and throwing it up for all of us to talk about it. The first thing I'm going to put out here, frightening images of Africa's future. We have had where we want to go. How ready are we to get there? When you look at these frightening images. When Professor Emmanuel was giving his presentation in the morning, he made mention of the fact that adoption of foreign practices, struggle to break free from independence. He stated it in some other ways. But these are challenges that have continued to confront Africa. Because, yes, we consume. But why is it that we are not producing the things that we are consuming? And we are just taking on what comes from other places? Let me start with this. The governance rules, as you will see me talk about it in the next couple of minutes, the governance rules that is applicable to universities in Europe, universities in other continents, is the same governance rules that are applicable to us. And I will be breaking them down. But why is it that their applicability in Africa are not resulting in the kind of outcomes that we want? Why is it that when they apply these same rules in the US, and when they apply these same rules in Europe, they achieve desired outcomes? Why is it that when we apply them here, we don't achieve them? When one of the speakers were talking earlier, they made mention of the fact that we need to move aggressively. You can only move aggressively if your foundation is sufficiently strong for you to ride. Otherwise, what you see us achieving, and all of us can attest to it, there is nothing sinister in accepting the fact of what is true. What you see us achieving from time to time, shining light in the horizon, one university will achieve one major thing here. Another will achieve another there. How consistent are the achievements? How do we build on what we have achieved? Those are the issues that continues to bother me. And those are the issues that I want to deal with in the presentation that I'm making. Concept of universities. When we talk about the concept of universities of the future, for me, universities of the future are already here with us. When you look at the way universities grow, they grow with contemporary issues from time to time. It is not as if universities will stagnate in one point for some time and then they are looking for a future to get to. No. They move and transform from time to time with the way society transforms. And that is the kind of thing that ordinarily should be happening, which is not happening now. When I talk about this, when you look at the smartphones that we have, when you look at the computers that we have that things like the brain, when you look at all of these and you look at personalized learning, which is already singing the non-dimities of traditional mode of universities. You see a university in the UK, you see a university in the US, advertising for students. And Nigerian students will apply to go to that university. With time, if things continue the way they are, some Nigerian universities will not have students. Some African universities may also not have students. If things continue, because if students look at it, or potential students look at it, that we are not going to have regularity in session. We are not going to have opportunity to graduate at the time envisaged in the admission letter given to us. We are not going to have opportunity to have access to the kind of things that will give us the skills that we need. They will prefer to apply to a university that is not in their country, even when they are operating from the confines of their room. And that confirms to us that the universities of the future are already here. When Evelyn was talking, I am sure for some of us, some of the things he's saying, if we want to actually interrogate it properly, we'll ask ourselves, are we anywhere near there? The answer is we are not. It is not as if we are not trying. We are doing a lot. Researchers in African universities are working themselves out. Why is it that students from African universities, they go to Europe, they go to the US, and they achieve distinction? It is not the case that they don't know what they are doing. It is simply because there are some things that are challenging them here, which is why they are not able to achieve the things they need to achieve. And then when they go out there and they're exposed to the facilities over there, it makes a whole lot of difference for them. I pick on relevance of good governance. And I ask myself, if we do not have good governance in African universities, it is fast becoming an existential issue. I'm not going to spend time on this. I'll just give us indication that when we talk about good governance, that is what assures the quality of decision making, provides a framework for it to be variegated stakeholders that are working within the system. Good governance also allows the university to be sustainable. And the kind of things it gives, adherence to purpose. What are the purposes of a university? The conversation we've been having since morning, those are the different purposes of the university. Good governance is what will allow you to adhere to them. Dedication to the interests of the different stakeholders within the system. Everybody, they have their different agenda coming into the system. They will be able to achieve it. Transparency, accountability, the kind of thing that Evelyn and other speakers pointed to. Without accountability, without transparency, we cannot achieve them. Accommodation of diversity, and then robust, well-informed decision making. I've talked about the goal of my presentation, which is just to delineate what are those threats and risks that I want to identify for us, which I see as the root cause of the challenge that we have. I try to define what university governance is, but I'm not going to bother us with this, because what I did was just to pick a World Bank definition that was used in 1992, and I tweaked it to come to a conclusion that it is the manner in which power is exercised in the management of an entity or institution, and all the stakeholders are covered. And then the state of governance in many African universities. Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, when I started the conversation, I made reference to the fact that there was a background document that was given by the organizers of this conference. And that background document stated, despite this improvement, there is still the general impression that the quality of higher education institution in Africa is generally not high enough to form a strong and formidable foundation for global competitiveness and address the continent's complex challenges. For me, it is not a general impression. It is the reality, and it is self-evident that yes, we are trying to achieve and give ourselves traction in developmental agenda, but we are seriously challenged by governance rules. And I'll come to the governance rules and the issues that I talked about with them. When you look at the way the university is structured, you find out that traditionally it is meant for people to come in, have disputes, and then from there ideas will grow. Ideation comes out from their disputes. And that is why, over time, 3 different models have emerged in terms of how do you manage the universities. The first model that I identify there is the bureaucratic model, the collegial model, and then the legislative framework model. When I started the conversation, I mentioned that it is the same model that is being used in different parts of the world that are working, that is also being used in Africa. Whether you're looking at it in terms of public universities or you're looking at it in terms of private universities. The bureaucratic model did not go far from the beginning because it did not factor the importance of informal members of the university system, the informal stakeholders within the system. And who are the informal stakeholders? The student union, the staff unions. These are also very important critical stakeholders within the system. But the bureaucratic model was always looking at the leader. The leader takes the decision and passes it down. So you find a situation where decision making was not inclusive. And that was why the bureaucratic model did not go too far. And that was what pushed us into the collegial model. The problem with the collegial model was it was too much of a collegiate system. And you find a situation where when it comes to taking final decisions, there is nobody to have the primacy of what decision to be taken. And that is what led us to the legislative framework. When you look at institutions in the UK, if you look at it in the US, it is either there's an enabling law, there's a charter, there are documents, there are instruments that are guiding the operations of the institutions. And that is what the institutions use in their governance process. What are the challenges? What are the things that this governance process of the legislative framework, what are those things that it gives? What are the features that comes out from it? Distribution of decision making among the different constituents. If you look at what we have here, we talk about the statutory organs of the university. Then we talk about the units, the faculties, and the rest of them working within the system. All of them, the legislative framework allows them to be inclusive and give their own input in the decision making. For instance, when you are looking at complementarity of knowledge, when you are looking at disciplinary plurality, these are issues that if it is not taken serious within a system, there will be a challenge in the way the system will respond to them. And I'll make that clear in a moment. Governance procedures to remedy complaints. When you look at the governance process that we have, it allows you where you have complaints. You are able to come up and at the end of the day, the system is self-correcting. The system the system looks at what exactly are the complaints and the system is able to deal with it. Layers of supervision to ensure that the desired outcomes are achieved. And then the informal structures are able to ask that question. Where are we now? And where are we heading? Where we are heading is what we have heard from earlier speakers in different ways. So the question is this. What are those fundamental things that are creating a problem for the governance process in a number of African universities? And I will say this. It is not as if all African universities are afflicted. Some of them are still able to work effectively. Those of them who are observing some of these issues that I'm going to be identifying now. The first thing that I've identified here is the problem of institutional autonomy and political interference. This is one of the major problems that is confronting African universities. Because you find a situation where when there's so much interference in the way the activities of the institution are being run, the university will not be able to deliver on its mandate. And I identified some of the things where we have had challenges. Competence in the context of potential appointments, staff promotions, student admissions, maintenance of discipline. When you are not able to maintain these basic issues in an institution, it becomes a problem. When there is external interference in the way an institution is being run and the university does not have that autonomy, it becomes a problem. Another one that I've identified here. Okay. Is there a problem from my end or from? Okay. Another one that I've identified here is leadership. Institutional autonomy in the context of okay, thank you. Yes. No, that's the slide before that. Okay. Yes. Institutional autonomy and what I call the unbridled chief executive internal interference. And here, if you look at what Stanley Ikemberry stated sometime in 2022 in the foreword to a particular book, there is a different thing when you occupy the position of leadership. And there's a different thing when you exercise the powers of a leader. When you exercise the various things that I've indicated there, it's a challenge. Arrogance of power, failure to use the feedback system of staff and students, preference for self-sponsored awards, politicization of institution. These are issues that create problems for governance. And then, if you look at the third one that I've mentioned here, respect for rule of law and due process. A major problem with a number of our institutions are when we don't respect the laws that we have on ground. Even if you change the model of the law at any time, it will still not achieve the purpose. So, I've indicated here, the University Governing Council, as a matter of fact, is critical when it comes to rules and when it comes to ensuring that appropriate policies are put in place. I've also made reference there to sufficient funding, which is imperative. And I've talked about the role of proprietors. When it comes to funding, a number of things that were indicated here today talks to the fact of what research can bring to systems. But the question is this: if a university management is not focused on what kind of priorities it should push, then it becomes a challenge for the system. I've also indicated here that students, parents, all of them, they have a role when it comes to funding an institution. My final slide here is this. If we are looking at ushering an authentic African presence into higher education, we must recognize the fact that there are basic issues of governance that are challenging our institutions. Unless and until we are able to deal with those basic issues in terms of ensuring that we institutionalize our process such that they become resilient against these challenges, it will be a difficult thing at the end of the day for the universities to thrive. I thank you.
Thank you very much. Another short female presenter. Good afternoon. Good afternoon, and very many thanks for the invitation to speak in this panel. Okay, at some point. Okay, there we are. So we were being asked, as you have realized, that we talk about governance of the universities and how governance should look like in the context of a new imaginary for African universities, and particularly African research-intensive universities. I have taken this assignment with a particular slant. So I will have to start by explaining first how I have changed and why I have changed the assignment. And then I'm going to make some reflections about the origin and the trajectory of the university in Africa, its role and its definition. And finally, I promise, I will tackle the question of governance in the Reimagining African University, and by then you will be more than ready for me to shut up. In terms of the reformulation of the question, the need for a new imaginary stems from the comparatively marginal role of the African continent in the global economy, the comparatively weak contribution of our universities to knowledge production and skills development, and, despite the several times mentioned progress made recently, from our poor contribution to poverty alleviation in many of its manifestations. While it is true that both our institutions and our governments could and should do better in all areas mentioned, the problem remains that the social system within which all universities operate is itself an obstacle for the very realization of the goals that we are setting for ourselves. Africa as a continent is bearing the brunt of the development of capitalism and colonialism since the 15th century, including the current climate change crisis. Surely, what happened in relation to the COVID-19 vaccine in this continent is a good enough demonstration of how the global political economy of knowledge production works and with what consequences. I contend then that an increase in the number of African universities at the top of world rankings will not change this substantially. There is no available hard evidence for any existing education system in the world helping to do an equality or having a real impact on the decision-making about climate change, locally or globally, to mention only two matters that affect us. On the contrary, not only inequality is increasing across all regions in the world, but we have not made a dent in reducing emissions. And at the same time, many universities, I'm talking globally, are themselves contributing to inequality in terms, for example, their own conditions of employment and their lack of intellectual independence or ineffectiveness in terms of climate change policy recommendations, even if the actual focus of the research is on the side of the angels. To reimagine the university in general and the university in Africa in particular, we need to develop a critique of the global and the local social relations of power that underpin the university itself. The conference organizers are spot on in identifying the areas we need to reimagine in order to bring about a different, renewed university. I have taken the liberty to rephrase them a little and to add a few, but it's basically the same argument. We need to reinvent the regulatory sphere within which the university works globally and within which it functions internally, including the relationships between the state and the public university in particular. We need to think again what knowledge do we research and teach, how it is organized, how is it assessed, and why. We need to look again at the responsibility 21st century universities have in the formation of individual subjectivity, that is the person, when technology has potentially devastating effects on the intellectual and emotional life of the youth for which we are responsible. We need to look at the role that universities play in the development of solidarity and purpose at the social level and how they themselves are located in society. We need to look at the sustainability of the university as enterprise, including our role in the development of labor regimes that encourage values like individualism, which we said that we are opposed to. Of all of these elements, my presentation will only explore the governance one. To summarize so far, my first proposition is that we cannot reimagine the university without reimagining our societies. This implies to develop a critique of the existing society through most of the areas that the university teaches and researches. The corollary of this proposition is a question: how this change in the quest alters the relationship of the university with the local society, the political authority, and the global rules of behavior. And I will come back to that in a moment. So let me go now into the issue of the African university. And when I said African university, I know that I'm using a very bland terminology, but allow me to use it for time reasons. The university, as we all know, is a comparatively new institution in Africa. The oldest universities were established by colonial powers at the beginning of the 20th century. Paul Celesa has put it very nicely, saying that the university was an alien institution, both in content and organizational form, whose role was the modeling of African societies along the European established path of development for its colonies. The creation of universities by new independent governments in African countries was in very particular ways an act of hope that these institutions will not only be Africanized, but also fundamentally that they will serve social development of the communities that sustain them. Thus, the university in post-independent Africa has generally been simultaneously aligned with the social development project and with the state that funds the institution. This gave rise to two potentially contradictory trends from the point of view of my first proposition about what it takes to reimagine the university, and that have been referred by the previous speaker. On the one hand, the university steps out of itself as the ivory tower or as part of the colonial project to respond to the local needs of society. On the other hand, this very inclination is often built on a lack of political independence, on the assumption that the role of the university is to support the state project and not to critique policy decision or the implementation of policies. This university weakens from the beginning its capacity to be a critical actor in social development. In post-independent Africa, these intrinsic difficulties were potentiated by what was mentioned this morning, the defunding of the university based on the dictum of the World Bank, that Africa does not need universities but good primary education. It was necessary to wait another half century for the tide to change again and funding be directed to the university as an engine for development, but now in the context of neoliberalism and managerialism. From the point of view of knowledge and its governance, the modes of knowledge serving development and nation building were far from settled. This gave way to a debate about the role of the university in Africa that is as pertinent today as it was in the 1970s when it emerged. According to Mandani, the university in post-independence Africa developed along two poles of debate: the notion of a universal human experience and the local response of the nationalists to this notion. At the practical level, this debate manifested in a series of controversies about the Africanization of the university, the organization of the curriculum and departments around disciplines or around inter- and transdisciplinarity, and between the relationship and about the relationship between the university and the society, and between the university and the state. This tension between the conception of the university as an institution responsible for the transmission and augmentation of knowledge about a universal human experience and the notion of the university as responsible for the transmission and augmentation of local knowledge with a view to problem solving was epitomized by the debate between Ali Masroui and Walter Rodney in Makerere and Dar es Salaam. And similar things happen in the context of South Africa. While white universities were established under colonialism, were imbued under the tradition of the Enlightenment, the black universities established under apartheid served for the capacitation of the homelands. Mandani makes very clear that neither Makerere nor Dar es Salaam were oriented towards or grounded on the needs and expectations of the surrounding communities from which the academics and the students came to the university. In this case, he also presents some rather negative perspectives of the communities about the university. So this debate about the relationship between the universities and the communities was also present in South African universities. The tension between the white university on the hill and the misery of the black township is one of the tropos of the mass fall movement that shaped South African universities in 2015. And here we are today, experimenting different degrees of state defunding of higher education, with insufficient impact of our research on the lives of the people and in the transformation of society, but also with a set of aspirations about the role and measurement of university performance that are being once again dictated to us. We are setting for ourselves parameters of institutional development that are derivative and that do not take into account some of our historical best intentions. Surely by now, we have learned that, paraphrasing Dr. King, the arc of capitalism development does not tend to justice. Dealing with war, migration, hunger, disease, gender-based violence, lack of housing, isolation, unemployment, poor primary education are our responsibility from the point of view of the development of powerful theory and research application, and from the point of view of the education of professionals and citizens capable of dealing with this within a social orientation. My second proposition then is that in almost all our countries, there was a historic moment in which we saw, if fleetingly, the university just belonging to the people and its role as serving social development away from the colonial powers. The corollary of this proposition is that we need to find the emotional and intellectual energy that inspired that moment to tackle the complexities of a deeply interlinked global world, which has become more just to Africa, which has not become more just to Africa, even if it has become more polite. So let me move now, finally, I promise, to the governance issue. Universities, especially research universities, are subject to different layers of regulation and governance. Regulation is external to the university as institution, and it operates depending on the university only at the national level or both at the national and at the global level. Regulation of universities locally happens through certification and quality assurance regimes, which enable marketing campaigns, selling the comparative advantage of this or that education, and ensuring the broader society the quality of education that we are providing. Parallel to the local regulatory system that constitutes the internal market, if you want, of higher education, there is an international exclusive market which is highly regulated, and it is ordered around international rankings as adjudicators of exchange value and actual capital. And this can be translated in terms of fees, endowments, grants. The regulatory sphere deploys in both local and global markets an economy of desire and creation of need. That is, good education is equal to employment. Employment is equal to ability to acquire goods and services, as well as positional advantage. A highly ranked university attracts funds, generates networks of belonging, which translate in prestige, fees, subsidies, students' endowments. At the risk of being kicked out of this conference at this very moment, let me ask the question: what would it take for the top 1,000 ranked universities to step out of the global regulatory system and stop being ranked? What difference would this make to universities in developed and developing economies from a regulatory and financial perspective? How would the research focus, publications patterns, regime of academic appointments, and student selection change if these universities step out of the market of rankings? What consequence would this have for their national and international roles and positioning? What are the interests, financial, political, and social, that constitute the counterforce to any change of the status quo? What needs to be done to break this down? And why do we think that there is no alternative? Why do we even refuse to think about it? Now, let's move for a moment into the actual governance of higher education. If we were to adopt my first proposition, that we cannot reimagine the university without reimagining the society within which it exists, and that therefore universities need to develop a critique of the existing society, we will find what are the consequences that this will have to governance and for all these universities. Surely, this quest will alter the relationship between the university and the community, however we define community. It will alter the role of the community itself in setting the research agenda and the teaching pedagogies of the university. It will alter the place of the community in the actual governance of research projects. It will alter the relationship of the university with the local authority, the state, the provincial authority, whoever. If, for example, the position of the university is to support through research community land rights or water rights against state-led projects. What will happen if the university, through research, oppose projects that will have negative effects on climate change for defined communities, or will support the cancellation of pharmaceutical contracts or building contracts? A quest to interrogate society from the point of view of the education provided by universities will result in medical doctors, engineers, IT specialists, agriculturalists, etc., you name it, who are more concerned about the collective impact of law, health, technology, and crops than about the profits of the firms and the global companies that employ them. If we take this perspective, who should sit in the advisory boards that advise faculties on the content of their academic programs? Let's move now inside the university itself. A university in search of social change would have to look at the ways in which itself has incorporated individualism, rabid competition, and intellectual mediocrity in the pursuit of numbers, in the management of staff, in the recruitment of students, in the development of programs. In the following of trends set elsewhere without interrogating the motive or the benefit. We will need to develop management structures to steer a university committed to change and not to the preservation of the status quo. Surely, a university committed to change will rethink the departmentalization of knowledge and the disciplining of knowledge. The governance of knowledge in departmental structures will have to be reimagined to allow for interdisciplinarity, transdisciplinarity, and the development of new fields of inquiry and teaching at both undergraduate and postgraduate level. A reimagined university will govern knowledge, including the community it serves, as part of the education of professionals and general graduates, but also in terms of the development of a research agenda. I know that what I have said is a set of quite complex and not accepted ideas, but I hope that this is sufficient for us to have a conversation, and before you throw me out, I will sit. Thank you very much.
Thank you to both our plenary speakers for being both provocative and passionate about the issues that they put out there with regard to university governance. We talked about governance at the universities of the future, but we are being reminded that the future is here right now. And so now I would open up for discussions. We need to wrap this up within the next 20 or so minutes. And so I'd like to take comments, questions. I have already thanked our speakers, so you introduce yourself and you go straight to the point. We are going to kiss this. That is, you keep it short and sweet, right? So we will do a first round. I saw this hand up. Yes, so we will start with you and then come here. Yeah.
Thank you very much. I must thank the presenters. My name is Victor Kore from Obafemi Awolowo University. One thing run across the presentations, and I'm really quite impressed. But here is the danger that I see. We seem to be running away from market, and at the same time we are running away from government hijack. My question here lies on the issues of autonomy. We know that he who pays the piper calls the tune. And to what extent can government interfere? What is the limits of autonomy? Now, even in Bristol, the AI center that have just been inaugurated, we hear the UK first. That is the hand of the market, at the hand of the government. If we say that students should pay, then we face the problem of going into private goods. And we started in the morning, the SG started with lamentation that we have allowed public good to disappear. Now higher education has become a private good. That calls for people to pay. So how do we balance these contending issues? Who pays? Who bears the cost?
Yeah, thank you very much. Now you come here. And
Hello.
Professor Welch is also here taking comments and questions. So
Okay, thank you so much. My name is Professor Timothy Nubi, the director of the Center for Urbanization and Habitable Cities, University of Lagos here. I've listened very carefully this morning, and I have concern because I was in Ghana 2015 when we were talking about the indigenous knowledge, and I have not seen anything the way we move it forward from there. And we were really scared in Nairobi when we were talking about the fourth industrial revolution. There are some concerns I have. The World Bank, as Professor Adams said in the morning, did they actually make a mistake? Was it a mistake? Professor Joe was talking about the indigenous the knowledge. And my concern is that it was talking about the foundation, that we really have to go back to the foundation and solve the problem of foundation. Go back to history. Is Africa really backward? African researchers really backward people? But they're not contributing anything to national development or the world global development. Who is saying the history? That the richest person in Africa used to be, in the world used to be a black person, Mansa Musa. Who is telling the coming generation that gold, as far back as 2,000 years before Socrates, gold was being mined in Africa, refined in Africa, being bought across the world? The technology of mining gold and refining it, is it not a high tech? So how do we lose this? The glass manufacturing at Ife, as far back as 7th century.
Prof, I appreciate your
my question,
concerns,
my two
connect
questions
to the
to this
session.
one.
Thank
To
you.
this, my two questions. How do we handle a pursuit of research that encourages present researchers to develop products when we were not given permission to manufacture?
Okay.
The COVID vaccine as a case study. You research, you develop products, but you need permission to manufacture. How far can we go if we don't push our research to commercialization, if we are not allowed? Now the second question is AI a weapon of war?
Yes.
To paralyze Africa or to sideline Africa? I think these are questions that we should really look into.
If you want to address your questions to any, specifically any of the speakers, you can say so. If it's general also, you say so. So let's have this lady here. Thank you.
My name is Joy Obadova. Thank you for the presentation. So I speak as a PhD student at the University of Lagos and also as an affiliate from the Federal Polytechnic, IDA. So my question is, what is the link between applied research and the traditional research that we do in the Polytechnic and the universities? How are we bridging the gap between the Polytechnic education and the university education if we're talking about the future of higher education in Africa? Thank you.
Thank you. There's one hand up.
Thank you. My name is Saidu Oseni, Professor, Obafemi Awolowo University, Ile-Ife. I have a question, one question each for each presentation. Excellent presentations. The first is to Professor Welch. Thank you very much. A very clear presentation on a win-win situation. My concern, however, is the risks and some mitigation strategies. Maybe you can share some. Professor Fagbon, thank you very much. You ended your presentation with a conclusion on resilience building. We need some clarifications and insights about building resilience, particularly for the university systems under the Nigerian environment. Thank you very much. Thirdly, this is in the lighter mode. How do we reimagine the society? That's just the question for Professor Well, compared to the universities. Thank you.
Okay, we'll take one more from the back and then I'll give you the opportunity to respond.
Thank you so much for giving me the opportunity. I want to appreciate the presenters. This is so fascinating and then evolving. I am Dr. Femi Balogun from, I'm a research postdoctoral fellow at the Center for Housing and Sustainable Development, University of Lagos. My question is to the second presenter. We have an insightful presentation on good governance influencing the university system and helping the higher education. But the question I have for the presenter is if you'll be able to draw the nexus between the arrays of researches we have all over Africa, and then with the policy formulation and then policy implementation, and if there is no significant nexus between these two, to what extent and what can we do, then what is the way forward? Thank you.
All right, thank you. So who would you like to go first?
Thank you for those great questions. I'll be very brief, because really at the heart of it are two, maybe three things. The first is money, and money in markets are absolutely essential. Second is the kind of politics of regulation and who gets to decide who owns the university. And the last one about risks and mitigation strategies, which I'll take to mean for the Charter itself. But let me start with AI as a weapon of war. So anyone who's been following the Ukraine or the Middle Eastern wars now will have seen that artificial intelligence, machine learning, and the ability of facial recognition is absolutely at the heart of these conflicts, allied to hand-to-hand fighting of the sort that, to be frank, the Greeks and Romans would have been familiar with, or anyone in the 16th or 17th centuries would have found. So the brutality of killing people, allied to the efficiency of artificial intelligence, is quite terrifying. And that is why it needs to have global governance. Global governance, not necessarily led by two superpowers who might see themselves as trying to get the advantage over each other. But who pays for that? At the moment, if you look at the North American stock market, the top performing stocks by an astonishing level are NVIDIA, who do the chips for AI, Google, Alphabet, which owns Google. Absolutely extraordinary. Billionaires are becoming billionaires, and very little of this is flowing down in a way that we might regard as a social justice format. So how do you convince the release of some of that economic power into either the public purse or into some sense of philanthropy? Now, I'm American in origin, so I keep telling my staff I don't mind talking about money the way that UK people do. People in the UK, they'll ask you whether you went to Oxford or Cambridge within the first minute, but they absolutely won't talk about how you actually fund those institutions. But it's really important that we decide the limits between autonomy, which we've heard is really important, controlling your own destiny, but actually acknowledging that without the funds, and these things are incredibly expensive, without the funds and guaranteed funds, we will not be able to invest in the capital and in the equipment, much less into the people who will do them. So the risks and mitigations for this charter is that without funders being on board, and I mean serious funders, let's say that the Australian Research Council, the UK Research Councils, the National Science Foundation, the Wellcome, if they sign up and say we expect to see charter signatory as a sort of, when you're doing collaborative work with African institutions, then we will know that we've made a success, because it's only when you have that heft behind it, and we're getting there. So I hope that's answered some of the questions.
Thank you very much. I've actually grouped the questions into two. The first one is, how do you achieve a win-win with the current global arrangement? And then the second one, what is the limit of autonomy? I would say that if you look at the current global arrangement, it's going to be difficult to talk about a win-win. And why do I say that? If you ask yourself, international trade, you have binding laws, binding international laws. If you look at copyright laws, they are binding international laws. But if you look at climate change, where it's an issue of justice, it's persuasive laws, a persuasive international law, non-binding laws that you have there. So at the end of the day, you see that the kind of construct that is on ground at the moment does not give that win-win, which is why it is important for African continent, and this goes beyond the universities. It is important for African leaders to get their act right and be able to say, when we go for international conversation, for instance, already the World Bank and the United Nations, they are saying now that there's a need to talk about a new global financial system, because they recognize that there are issues with the current global financial system. But if African leaders continue to go for aids, continue to go for support, without sitting at the table with them as sovereign nations and saying, we have the natural resources, we equally have the talents that can develop these natural resources, so let us talk as equal partners and co-create, we will never achieve a win-win. So that is the problem when you talk about a win-win. Then in terms of what is the limit of autonomy, what I'm saying in relation to the limit of autonomy, which we need to internalize, is for quite a number of African universities, Even the rules that are on ground, we are not allowing it to manage us in terms of our autonomy. We are not managing our own affairs effectively. Why is it that the same template that is in use by other countries, they have been able to be transparent about it, to be accountable about it, and they are able to work? It is not as if politics is not there for the UK. We had a presentation by Evelyn. The government will always seek to interfere. But when you are doing the right thing yourself, within your system, you are not going to open your flanks for that external person to come in and say they want to manage your affairs. But because we are not managing our affairs effectively, that is why that external interference is coming in. Because we are also internally not showing the kind of, and that's why I said I'm not turning all universities with the same brush. Some universities are doing it well, but quite a number of universities are not doing it well. So until we get that internal autonomy and external autonomy right for African countries, it will be difficult for us to amortize the benefit of collaborations. It will be difficult for us to amortize the benefit of co-creation that is being put on the table for us. We will continue to mouth it. It becomes a slogan. But internalizing it and having the benefit of it becomes a challenge for us. Thank you.
The advantage of coming last is that everybody else answered all the questions, so that's great. I would like to touch on the question that has not been answered, which is the question that a young person from the tech, yourself. Okay. With the issue of applied research, fundamental research, strategic research, happens a little bit what Prof. Reddy was talking about this morning about transdisciplinarity and how the parts need to come together. Real transdisciplinarity also implies the need to understand how technologies function, who applies the technology, to train the technologists in order to do things. So for me, that connection that you are talking about has to do with how we bring in the two education systems, if you will, together from the very beginning of research projects. And I wish all of our countries were capable of doing that, because actually we are, through this connection, we are wasting energies that could be applied to actual real solutions. Your problem about the limits of autonomy. I think that the limits of autonomy are a permanent negotiation because we do need the money. But around the notion of autonomy, I would ask permanently the ethical question. Who am I doing this for? Who am I benefiting with this? And how far this thing allows me to go forward in terms of the sort of hefty ideals that I'm setting for myself. But it's a permanent balancing act. It's not an answer. It's not a formula, as the example of Bristol demonstrates. Thank you very much.
So I've been tasked to ensure that we end the session by 5 p.m. Unfortunately, I don't see any hands up, so it's a good time to wrap it all up. This session has really instigated us to think about the governance of our future universities. And essentially, the issues are complex, but all that I get from this afternoon's session is that, number one, African universities are capable. The second main point is that there are issues with regard to governance in our universities, and we need to look at these, rethink these, and build robust governance systems for ourselves. When we have done that, yes, we need the money, and others would have to provide the money. But when we have these robust governance systems, then we are able to point out our regulations, our policies to whoever is coming to support us, so that they don't have to tell us what we need to do, even if they are providing the money. It is imperative for us to rethink our governance systems, create those robust systems. Otherwise, all that we are talking about here, all our dreams will not only continue to be dreams, but they will turn into nightmares to haunt ourselves. And so, on that note, I would like to thank our keynote speaker, Professor Welch, and as well as our plenary speakers, Professor Fagbohun and Professor Lunge, and to you, our audience, for being that engaging. Thank you very much. This brings us to the end of the session, and Prof. Saite will take over.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. So we will break now. It's 5 minutes to 5. We'll break now. Of course, in the schedule that you have, there was supposed to be a 30-minute break. We can't afford that now, certainly. So I'm appealing to you, let's have a 10-minute break and be at the parallel sessions 15 minutes from now. Sorry? Yeah, so the ushers will be there to guide you to the law school and so on. Yeah, thank you.
much.